and merciless warriors who struck fear across Europe. But were they really the monsters that history paints them to be, or is there more to the story? Today we'll separate fact from fiction and uncover the surprising reality of Viking life. Much of what we know about Vikings comes from their enemies, especially Christian monks who recorded Viking raids. To these writers, the Vikings were demons from the north, pagans who slaughtered, pillaged, and desecrated churches. The infamous raid on Lindisfarne in 793 CE was described as a harbinger of doom, with monks portraying them as godless savages. Stories like this spread across Europe, cementing the Vikings as terrifying invaders in the popular imagination. But was this the whole truth, or just a one-sided view written by the victims? In reality, most Vikings were not warriors at all. They were farmers, fishermen, and traders. Only a small fraction of their time was spent raiding. The rest was devoted to daily life. Archaeological evidence shows they raised livestock, grew crops, and built strong communities. They grew barley and rye, raised sheep and cattle, and depended heavily on the sea for fish. They lived in longhouses made of timber and turf, often sharing space with their animals in the cold Scandinavian winters. This side of Viking life, quiet, domestic, and hardworking, is rarely shown in movies, but it was the reality for the majority. And yet, the adventurous spirit of the Vikings couldn't be ignored. Their ships, long, sleek, and remarkably advanced, allowed them to travel where few others dared. These vessels could cross open oceans, but also navigate shallow rivers, giving Vikings the element of surprise. They sailed not just west toward England and France, but also eastward into Russia, establishing trade routes that stretched to Constantinople and even Baghdad. Some went further still, reaching Greenland and North America centuries before Columbus. To reduce them to barbarians ignores their skill as explorers and seafarers. But let's be clear, Viking violence was real. Raids devastated monasteries, villages, and towns. Excavations at sites like Repton in England show evidence of mass graves, sword wounds, and axe injuries. Warriors carried round shields, spears, and heavy battle axes that could cleave through armor. But here's an important point. They were not uniquely brutal. Medieval Europe was already a violent place. The Franks raided, the Normans conquered, and even Christian kings enslaved prisoners of war. Vikings stood out because of their sudden hit-and-run tactics, striking from the sea and disappearing just as quickly. To the people on the receiving end, this felt like an unstoppable nightmare. But in truth, Vikings were playing the same game as everyone else in the medieval world. They were just better at it. One of the darkest images tied to Vikings is the so-called blood eagle, a gruesome execution method where the victim's back was cut open and lungs pulled out. It's described in some sagas, but historians debate whether it actually happened or whether it was symbolic storytelling meant to emphasize the brutality of enemies. Even if it never happened, the story itself shows how the Vikings were remembered as figures of horror. But here's the other side of the coin. Vikings also had laws, culture, and order. They weren't just warriors. They were people of the Thing, a democratic assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes, pass judgments, and make decisions. This proto-parliamentary system is one of the earliest examples of collective governance in Viking society. And what about women? In many parts of Europe, women had few rights, but Viking women could own property, request divorces, and run farms when their husbands were away. Some sagas even tell of shield maidens, female warriors, though historians debate how common they really were. Still, the fact that women had more independence than in most of Europe challenges the image of a purely brutal society. Religion also played a role in shaping Viking life. Their gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki, represented war, wisdom, fertility, and chaos. The sagas describe a belief system that valued courage in battle and honor in death, with warriors hoping to reach Valhalla. This warrior ideology contributed to their reputation, but it was also deeply tied to poetry, ritual, and storytelling. And let's bust some myths. Myth number 1. Horned helmets. No Viking ever wore them. This was an invention of the 19th century artists, most famously in Wagner's opera costumes. Real helmets were conical, simple, and practical. Myth number 2. Dirty savages. Archaeological digs reveal combs, tweezers, ear cleaners, and even Viking soap. They bathed at least once a week, much more often than their European contemporaries. In fact, some English chroniclers complained that Viking men bathed so much and dressed so well that they stole women with their grooming habits. Myth number 3. Only raiders. In truth, many Vikings settled peacefully. They established towns like Dublin, York, and Kiev. They integrated into local cultures, married locals, and left behind a genetic and cultural legacy. Normandy in France is named after the Northmen who settled there. So, were Vikings really that brutal? The truth is far more complicated. They were capable of ruthless violence, but they also had a structured society, laws, families, trade networks, and cultural achievements. They wrote poetry, told sagas, and carved runestones to honor their dead. They explored unknown seas and founded communities that endured for centuries. The legacy of the Vikings still shapes our world today. Place names across England trace back to Old Norse. Their shipbuilding influenced naval design for generations. Their exploration of North America, though short-lived, proved that the world was smaller and more connected than anyone in medieval Europe had imagined. And their mythology continues to inspire movies, books, and games in modern times. So, were Vikings truly monsters? Number. They were human, fierce, ambitious, sometimes violent, but also innovative, organized, and culturally rich. The brutal barbarian image was as much propaganda as it was reality. Like any people in history, they were more than one thing. Warriors, yes, but also farmers, traders, poets, and explorers. History's pen painted them as demons from the north, but the real story shows us a people who were far more than just brutal. They were complex, daring, and unforgettable. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth about the Vikings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we dive into more history versus reality.